We are here with Chris Grove, Managing Director at Eilers and Krejcik Gaming,
Yep.
Which is a boutique consultancy. And Chris is a fella who very interestingly has established himself in a fairly short period of time as maybe one of the most respected observers and experts on sports betting in the United States. So we're really pleased to have you here today,
Happy
Chris.
to be here.
You've done a couple of recent reports that maybe you might touch upon. One of them recently, and one of them is some sense of the size of the opportunity of sports betting in the United States. Can you tell us what you see?
So if we think about sports betting as a 50-state opportunity with both retail and online sports betting permitted, we ballpark that at about a $17 billion opportunity in terms of annual revenue. I think the big pieces inside that to unpack, at least briefly, are that mobile online represents the lion's share of that opportunity. And obviously we're seeing that play out already in New Jersey, where online sports betting is accounting for 75% to 80% of handle and revenue. I think the other big piece to unpack is that while you do have a number of states that are moving forward on sports betting right now, we only see an opportunity of about $6 billion by 2023, largely because, as I know you and your team have discussed extensively, some of the large population states like California, Texas, and even Florida are going to be incredibly complicated battlegrounds.
$6 billion is still a nice hunk of change for...
It's a lot of money.
Right. And last year, I believe, was about $500 million.
Yep, and we'll probably crest over $1 billion this year, so definitely moving in the right direction. I think you and I have actually had this conversation. That number, in contrast to how many in the industry paint sports betting almost as an amenity, something that can drive additional footfall, the conflict between those two is an item of curiosity for us, because we do see a total revenue number that's incredibly material in terms of direct revenue, right, relative to what commercial and tribal casinos are doing today in the aggregate.
One of the questions, especially from an investor's perspective, is who are the winners or the prospective winners that I might want to put my money in?
Sure.
And I look at the large companies, the very large companies such as IGT and Scientific Games, and say, well, now that's a nice new stream of revenue, but maybe not a needle mover.
Right.
And then you look at the smaller companies and you say, a lot of great stories out there, but how many of them are going to be here 24 months from now? And then we got the guys in between, maybe in terms of size, maybe poor players like a Canby or something. How do you see it from an investment perspective?
So I think that you hit the nail on the head, right? You have this question of the relative size of the opportunity compared to the EBITDA or market cap of a particular company. That makes it difficult to play the large suppliers or the large casino operators from a sports betting perspective. I do think some of the regionals, and you've talked about this in several of your columns, some of the regionals with a large multi-state footprint are in an interesting position. You've seen the kind of value that El Dorado has been able to generate through the deals that it struck with William Hill and with BetStars, and I think the significant value that Boyd has been able to generate through the deal that it struck with FanDuel. So I think large regionals that have a clear strategy for extracting value from their access as an asset are interesting plays, and I also think that media companies, in so much that they intersect directly with the US sports betting opportunity, can be interesting plays as well. But the context is what you already pointed out. There is so much inherent uncertainty about how this industry is going to roll out, what the timing is, and as so many new consumers are coming into it, what their interests are going to be and what brands are going to resonate with them, what ways of sports betting are going to resonate with them. Picking winners at this point is complicated. So what we see right now as an obvious opportunity is market access. That's a threshold question for anyone who wants to be involved, whether it's DraftKings, FanDuel, Bet365, Wynn, anyone who isn't already a license holder in a given state needs to find a partnership to get in. That asset has proven to be a pretty lucrative one for a lot of license holders in New Jersey, and I think you would see that asset be even more lucrative in a state like California, for example.
I was asked earlier today when I was being interviewed by someone else about what we're going to see a year from now. And my response was that partly we'll see what we see today. We'll see people getting into the business, we'll see states legalizing, we'll see people trying to figure it out. But also we'll start to see some of the lessons from the pioneers. Maybe from a Rhode Island with a 1% tax rate, now it's disappointing in its revenues. Any thoughts along those lines of maybe some mistakes that you're seeing that legislators maybe ought to be aware of as they consider their policies?
Tax rate is obvious. I think the question of allowing online access in addition to retail access is also one that you'll see brought back up likely in Mississippi and other states that move early on this question. But it makes sense to me that states would start with a relatively conservative approach and frankly a high tax approach, because they're looking for better or for worse, some sort of short-term guarantee often out of these opportunities. And I think they're sensing the same uncertainty that you and I just discussed when they're crafting policy. I do think I don't know that I'll call it a mistake, I think the one decision that's likely to be revisited in a number of states is that question of online access versus just retail-only access. And for states like Iowa that are considering a hybrid model where you have online, but you have to come into the property in order to complete your registration or to deposit, I think we'll learn pretty quickly that those sorts of models place an artificial constraint on the potential of your marketplace. I think another issue that's likely to be debated in an ongoing fashion is that question of market access, because what we've seen in New Jersey with online casino as well as sports is that generally speaking, more brands means a bigger market, and a bigger market means a larger tax base and also a larger license fee base for state governments. So I think the access question, both in terms of distributing the product and then who's allowed to play in these markets, are probably going to be two issues we see relitigated as the industry starts to mature a little bit.
Your most recent report, which I believe you maybe released either prior to or coincident with this conference, is the personas of the 7 personas.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about those 7 personas?
So definitely what we're looking for here is an opening to a conversation. We think that the American sports bettor is in some ways different than the European customer. And what we tried to do with this report is to paint an initial picture based on a survey we did of people who are active in terms of betting on sports in America right now, feedback from operators in New Jersey about the kind of customers they're seeing, and then a meta-analysis of others who have surveyed this group as well. What we'd like to do is start the process of labeling these customers, not because we think that's the end point of the conversation, but because we think it's an important way to start framing the conversation so that things like product, things like marketing can start to be adapted specifically for the US market. I don't think that if you take the European model or the Australian model and drop it into America, that you end up with an optimized market. So I think that our clients and anyone who's involved in this space should be thinking critically about how the American consumer differs, what their motivations for betting are, and then shaping your brand as an operator and your marketing strategy and your retention strategy, and frankly your product strategy accordingly. I think if we go out and are putting the same message to all customers and offering all customers the same product, the same brand voice, I think you end up alienating a lot of customers and leaving a lot of money on the sidelines and probably letting it stay in the illegal market if it's active at all.
Any other issues on sports betting you think should be addressed?
Obviously, we have the Wire Act overhang, and
right.
I think we're waiting for some news on that today, so it'll be interesting to see how the enforcement guidelines intersect when they come out with everyone's plans for this market. I do think there has been a bit of a tendency in the industry to minimize the importance of that issue. Even though we've talked a lot about it, I'm not sure that everyone has fully digested how existential of a threat that could ultimately be, and unfortunately it seems by and large that the issue is out of the hands, out of the control of the industry, which is never a great place to be in.
Chris, you've covered an awful lot of territory in a short period of time. Thanks
I appreciate
very much.
Thank you, Frank. Always a pleasure.